Hi, I'm Alister Benn, and this is Vision and Light. Today, I have the great pleasure of bringing to you Ben Horne. I've been a great fan of Ben's work for a great number of years now, and last week we had an incredible conversation. He's such a lovely guy. He talks very well for himself. He has a beautiful relationship with the landscape, and his images are to die for. In fact, Kristin and I just bought one of his books, which is filled with some of the most beautiful photographs. He shoots primarily with a 10 by 8 large format camera, which is unusual in the modern era, and his YouTube channel focuses on his adventures out in the American West with this behemoth of a camera and the images that he makes. So please check out both his book and his YouTube channel, and of course his website and his portfolio. Before we dive into the main conversation, I would just like to mention a little bit of news from this week in that I have published my new ebook, The Colour of Meaning. I've been working on this for nearly a year and it's a delight to bring it to you now. It's a direct follow-up from my Luminosity and Contrast ebook that I brought out in 2018, and it builds on those concepts by introducing colour into luminosity, contrast, discussing transitions, discussing the lab color space. So please click on the link below, check out the ebook, and it would be great if you could buy that because it really supports our work. Without much further ado, please listen to myself, Alister Benn, talking to this week's guest, Ben Horne. Mr. Ben Horne, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me on. This is awesome. I've been looking forward to this.
Good. Well, tell me that in an hour.
We'll see how it goes.
Right. So something that every time we do one of these, it's an open book. I've got no idea where this conversation is going, as you are also aware. So what I'm really interested in is you have this YouTube channel, and you've had it since about 2009 or something like that.
Yeah, that's when I started way back when.
So 2009, you started making these video journals. And I guess you were kind of early in that whole thing. I mean, now everybody does it.
Yeah.
But do you feel that making a video while you're out in the field, trying to be at one with nature, do you feel that process of making the video impacts on your ability to enjoy your time in the field from a purely immersive point of view?
It does. And that's actually been something I've been thinking about over the past few trips, because when I'm out taking photos, it kind of uses one part of the brain and it uses a certain amount of time. And when you do videos, it uses sort of a different part of the brain, and you have to think ahead of what's going to potentially happen. You have to kind of constantly set things up. You have to remember what you've already said. So it's like your brain is working at full capacity all the time, and you don't have as much time to just really sit back and relax and to enjoy. I mean, I get plenty of time to enjoy my time out there, but it's kind of draining. And I'd say that after perhaps it takes me like 1 or 2 days to kind of get into the rhythm of a trip and kind of create my new whatever routine I'm going to have for that trip. But after about 5, 6, 7 days, I definitely get pretty burnt out, both in terms of physically, but also just mentally in terms of it's almost like you're trying to swim, but having a hard time breathing and keeping up with everything. So you're kind of trying to stay afloat a little bit with everything going on. And so it does sort of tap into the experience a little bit, but at the same time with the still photography, that slows me down because there's no rushing that.
No.
So I get plenty of opportunities to sit there and enjoy a scene and kind of contemplate setting up a photo, all that sort of process. And in those times, the video, I kind of set that aside a little bit. And if you ever see me taking a picture in the video, I'm not actually taking the picture. I'm recording that after the fact because I can't do all that at once.
No.
But it is a little bit, it's a lot more demanding than I think people realize. And so going ahead in 2021, I'm planning on doing some more trips, but some of them I will not do video. It'll just
Okay.
keep it to photography. And I think that'll give me the sort of balance I really need to have.
Good, good. Well, that's encouraging to hear, because I think something that's, I only started my channel last year, and it, I mean, we're being very grateful for it. I mean, it's providing us with a livelihood during this time where all our
Mm-hmm.
workshops are cancelled and all of that type of thing. But something I notice is that, you're constantly thinking about that as a product.
Mm-hmm.
The video is the product of your time, as it were. Whereas for me, and I strongly suspect you're the same, that your photographs, it's not the photograph that's the product, it's the experience of witnessing that is the
Mm-hmm.
product almost. So, and I'm really interested to see, to make sure you buy enough of that time, that
Mm-hmm.
experiential time.
Yeah. And that's, I think it's definitely important to have the time to just experience it out there. And that's what photography gives. And just like you said, I mean, I'm really grateful for the video stuff. And actually initially I was planning on just doing more trips and doing more videos and stuff, but like, I don't know, it is a lot of work. But I will say though, that sometimes, I don't know if this has been your experience at all, but sometimes the trips go by incredibly fast to the point where I'll get home and it's almost like it didn't even happen.
Right.
But then the process of making the video allows me to relive the experience, which I think adds another dimension to the photos. Because at least with the film workflow, I'll come back from the trip, and then it's usually about a week or so until I have the film developed at the lab I use. But in that time, I start working on the videos. So I
Right.
start working on the videos for the trip and kind of relive it, but I haven't seen the photos yet. And so in some cases, I've completed like one or two videos, other than like some voiceover stuff, and I don't really know what the end of the video is because I don't know how the photo turned out. So it's really is interesting to be able to relive that experience also without knowing how the photos turned out. And then you see the photos, and that's why sometimes at the end of my videos, there's like a voiceover saying, "Yeah, that was gonna be great, but no, this wasn't great," or maybe this was the surprise, or this is a photo I didn't think much of when I made the video. I didn't think much of it, but then you
Right.
see that photo, it's like, well, clearly that's the best one from the trip, and I had no clue. So it's
Right.
a surprise, which is interesting.
Yeah, I just picked up a film camera again in the last sort of 3 or 4 months, just
Hmm.
a 6x6, a little Hasty 6x6, and it was the same when I was in Iceland with Tom Heaton and Adam Gibbs. That
You
you're
have that
back.
blue one, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I saw
yeah.
that.
It's really sweet. It's really
Yeah.
cool. So I mean, I love it. It's great, but it's exactly that same thing. Is that your experience in the field is very, very different than when shooting digital. Now, did you ever, or do you ever shoot digital? Or are you exclusively 10x8?
So I started with film in high school, just kind of, film class in high school and stuff. That's when digital first started coming about. So I got some digital cameras, but then I went to film. And then like 2 weeks ago, I bought a digital camera again. And
Oh wow.
obviously I do digital for all the video stuff. So I'm pretty decently
Yeah.
versed on it. But one of the things that I think, having done the 8x10 stuff for over a decade now, you kind of get locked into knowing how certain shots are going to turn out. You don't want to risk too much. You don't want to experiment too much because it is expensive to shoot those cameras.
Sure.
So it kind of like gives me this tunnel vision, and this tunnel vision has worked really well for the past 10 years. It allows me to, walk through wash and design and see something and know immediately that's going to be a great photo, which gives me a sense of direction, which is nice. But at the same time, I haven't been probably experimenting as much as I should.
Okay.
So I did recently buy one of the Sony full frames, an A7R4, and just like a 24-70 lens,
Okay.
just so I can have kind of a different thought process when I'm in the field. And one of the things that spurred this on, and this might sound a little silly at first, but and you might know about this, but I have this parody account on Instagram called Wilderness Influencer,
Oh right. No, I
and
didn't
it's
know that.
yeah, so it's like this little 12-inch doll that'll just like pose in various places, and it looks like a real person. It's a highly realistic doll, and it just kind of poking fun at the Instagram culture of, putting yourself in every photo, but people stand there with their rigid arms and kind of like a weird aggressive stance. So I put this little doll in various places and take pictures of it, And when you look at these pictures, it looks real. It looks like a real person. So kind of the joke is some people don't realize that
Right.
it's just this parody account. But I think it was in 2019 when I was in Zion National Park in the wintertime was the first trip I took that doll on. And I remember one day it was like, you know, long day of doing photography. It was the end of the day. So I'm like, oh, I should get some photos for that account. So I went down to the Virgin River. There's some snow on the ground. And I just like plop that doll down on the ground, have him standing up there, kind of get down low with my camera, taking pictures of him. It was using a totally different part of my brain, whole different thought process. And I'm thinking, this is fun. You know, this is just like, you don't quite know what the end result's going to be. There's a lot of experimentation with it. So based on my experience doing that, and also there was a photo I shot before going on a backpacking trip earlier this year where my wife made this little light up campfire. So it's made of like hot glue and like little sticks and stones, and there's a little light in there. So it photographs completely realistic. And I'm on the edge of this cliff in southern Utah, and I have it sitting there. And the whole point of that account is also to sort of bring awareness to, you know, people are just like setting up like campfires where you're not supposed to, just for Instagram pictures and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I have those pictures set up. I have to focus stack it and do all this sort of stuff to it. But meanwhile, I'm like, it's just fun. You know, it's different. It's fun. So that was one of the reasons why I wanted to get the better digital camera, so I can sort of activate that part of my brain on these trips and hopefully take that information and what I learn in different sorts of light and different compositions and stuff and bring that back to my film work.
Okay.
So to expand my boundaries a little bit when working with film. So yeah, that's kind of, you know, film, digital, back to film, back to digital, kind of all over the place.
Well, you know, and at the end of the day, they're all just tools of awareness.
Oh yeah.
At the end of the day anyway. So, but you know, something I feel with film that works so beautifully is that the sort of, there's a sense of, because a lot of your photographs, the intimate scenes in particular, looking at the floor, looking at the stuff at your feet, there's a static nature to it in that once you've found it, it's not going anywhere.
Yes, that's the best part.
But at the flip side of that is you have other elements like chaotic flowing water, where the serendipity of multiple shots allows you to find those ones that just create that perfect aesthetic, you know, which doesn't lend itself to film, you know, at all.
Oh yeah. That's because like with film, you're limited to your shutter speed. So there's like only so much experimenting you can do with that sort of subject.
And it's $15 a shot or
yeah, it gets expensive pretty fast. And also it's how much you can carry with you and how much you want to reload at the end of the day. That's not the fun part.
Right. Yeah. So in terms of, we've covered a lot of ground already. In terms of because, you know, you take off on these trips out into beautiful countryside in the US, which has it in abundance. And why do you go? You know, what is your reason? What's your primary goal, I guess?
I guess I should go back to kind of what got me started on these trips. And it actually dates back to late 2008, early 2009, when the economy had its first big issue, the Great Recession.
I remember it.
Yeah. And, you know, it's one of the things that kind of forced a lot of change and stuff along those lines. And I graduated from college in 2004. So from there, I was working full-time at a local camera store here in San Diego.
Okay. And,
you know, when you have the economy taking a nosedive and there's a lot of uncertainty, no one's going to go out and buy a camera. So the store was really, really quiet. The owners of the shop is, you know, small family-owned business. They were like, you know, what are we going to do? If anyone has any ideas, let us know. We're open to anything. So I just kind of like, hey, I'll go on a trip for a week and a half. Don't pay me. This is just like a good time to get out there. And so I think that year I went on 5 trips.
Okay.
Kind of aligned mostly with the season. So I did 2 fall trips. And that kind of started this process of going on these like, you know, week and a half long solo trips. And I just found that I was very, very productive in a relatively short period of time. And I also found that if I do hardly any local shooting at all, even though there's some good stuff here in the San Diego area. I need to be a certain distance away from home in order to kind of be in that right mindset, in order
Okay.
to just concentrate. And I'm also the type where if anything is not going quite right, if my shoe's bothering me a little bit, or it could be something small, I'm just gonna be like just right out of that zone, and I'm just gonna be like, I don't want to do this anymore. This isn't really, something's not quite right or whatever. So I just found I need to spend some dedicated time in these areas, just concentrate on photography, and just that kind of became part of the process as far as like how I started doing that. As the economy started getting better through the years, I kept the tradition of going on these trips. Same thing, just going on the trip, not being paid during that time, and just using that time for photography. But now it's sort of evolved into something where I am doing this now full time as of the pandemic when that started. And now I wouldn't say, I know a lot of people go out into nature in terms of as an escape from the everyday life. But now I have a little bit of a different approach where it's now just a challenge of going out there and trying to gather more work and find more photos and trying to build that portfolio. So I don't necessarily see it as an escape,
Right.
but I definitely enjoy the process, and I feel like that's kind of where I'm meant to be out there in the
Right.
field and on those trips.
As long as your shoes are okay.
As long as the shoes are okay, as long as I don't destroy cameras, which I've done, as long as rodents don't eat the engine wires in my Forerunner and disable my vehicle. I've had stuff happen. Yeah.
No, you said you've gone full time when, as of what sort of March, April time?
Yeah, as of March. And this actually was a transition I had been starting for several years. I've never really been one to just jump right into the deep end. I know some people that's just tearing off the Band-Aid, jumping in the deep end of the pool. That's just what they really need in order to thrive. But I'm more of like, dip my toe in the water, get a little deeper, just smooth that transition. And so what I did is, I don't know, it was 2016, somewhere in that range. I scaled back from 5 days a week to 4 days a week at my day job.
Right.
And then I scaled back to 3 days a week the following year. At the start of this year, I was only working 1 day a week anyways.
Okay.
And then the pandemic hit. I'm like, all right, well, this is an opportunity, just like the Great Recession, nearly a decade before, that kind of got me going in that direction to begin with.
Right.
So in that sense, it's been slightly unnerving kind of jumping into this new thing full time. But at the same time, it's something that's built through the years.
Right.
So it's not scary. It's kind of fun.
Well, what's the worst thing that can happen, eh?
I don't think we're allowed to say that in 2020. There's a lot of bad things that could still happen.
Yeah, and I mean, I've been doing this full time for a decade now, and we've had to completely reshape our business on a couple of occasions.
Mm-hmm.
And this year was going to be 25 weeks of workshops, which delivers a certain amount of income, which is pretty much guaranteed. It's once the trips are all organized, you've just got to turn up.
Yeah.
So obviously we got to March, and it was all of a sudden everything was cancelled, and you've got to kind of reinvent yourself.
Yeah.
Instantly.
It forces change for sure.
Yeah, that's right. But that's what life's about.
Mm-hmm.
You kind of strike me as a very sensible person, if you don't mind me saying so. If that's
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, and do you think your choice of format, your primary choice of format, is a function of that kind of methodical, reasoned, controlled influence in your personality? Do you think there's going to be a flip side, is when you start shooting more digital, that it's going to either inspire you to, I mean, I'm a big guy about, there's not about thinking outside the box, there's no box.
Yeah.
We don't want a box, we don't want to think outside, there's just no box. So do you think that the sort of the Sony is going to kind of allow you to be more devil may care and sort of more yeah, frivolous perhaps?
I don't think so. I think what it comes down to is I need to have some degree of limitations, um, which helps give me a sense of guidance. So, I mean, especially visiting, if I were to visit some new location I've never been to before, and you have so much stuff all around you, and you don't even know where to start.
Mm.
At least with the film setup, I can just be like, well, I can't really do that. I can't really do that. I can kind of do this. Oh, this looks good over here. So it gives a sense of direction, which I think leads to a long-term sense of satisfaction with the work I produce. And I don't think the digital is going to change that too much. I mean, I'm in the same way we're shooting with a film camera, you know, taking a single photo of a scene and packing up the camera and going away can be fulfilling, even though I try to shoot two just because, just in case. Um, but I think that with digital, I'll have a very similar approach where I'll experiment a little bit, but I don't think it's going to change too much. I do think that um, I'm not going to see digital the same way as I do with film, because the film setup, I feel like I'm producing something that's timeless in a way,
Hmm.
something that is outside of technological advances, where it's a mature technology. Um, and there's something very reassuring about that.
Right.
So I don't think it's going to change too much, other than just allowing me to experiment a little bit and maybe take pictures of a 12-inch doll on the edge of a cliff with a little higher resolution than the
this
12
this is the
megapixel.
this is the root of it, isn't it? This is why you're
Yeah,
doing
it's a large influence for sure.
We're
Yeah,
trying to dig into a deeper purpose here, but let's face it, there isn't one.
it's all about a doll. Yeah.
Well, we admire your honesty, if nothing. So, you've embarked on this newfound professional career as a landscape photographer. What do you hope to achieve with your work beyond millions of dollars in your bank account?
Other than that,
Because that's a given, of course.
oh yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure that's why everyone gets into landscape photography.
I've had to move house to get room for my second Porsche.
I think it's just for me, it's all about just continuing to build the body of work and then kind of see where that takes me. I don't really have any big ambitious plans. I mean, I've been returning to Zion National Park every fall for 12 years now,
Right.
and I'm perfectly content going back to some of these same areas again and again, and just getting to know these places better. And I think one of the things I'd love to do is just find some other areas to spend some time exploring. But yeah, there really isn't anything profound. I'm pretty happy with how things are going, and the the body of work I've been able to build through the years. Looking back at some of those old photos and just being satisfied with the decisions I made and how those turned out. So nothing really, just kind of keep going with it. I guess that's the main thing, really.
How
So
do you balance your because obviously, as photography becomes a career, there obviously becomes a fiscal component to it.
mhm.
You rely on it to pay your bills and put food on the table and replace your truck and all of
Yeah,
these things that happen from time to time. Um, so to a certain extent, you become a commodity. Ben Horne is no longer the guy who can just go and do his own thing. Ben Horne has to become the brand, as it were, especially with your name. Your name is on your
yeah.
website, it's on your channel. So you're building yourself into a brand. So in terms of productivity, how do you continue to drive this? I mean, do you put a lot of thought into the sort of brand building, follower accumulation? Because that basically all relates to dollars at the end of the day.
It does, and there's something, I don't know. There's something, I think we're going to look back at this era when like people become brands and all that. And I think we're going to see that it wasn't a good thing. I think because people are
This was pretty
people,
much
you
my
know.
point.
I think we're going to look back at it, and it's going to just, long term, it's not going to be great. So um, I don't know. I've always been one to kind of go against the grain and kind of do things a bit differently. And there's things I know that would be good in terms of, like the YouTube channel growing and this and that. But honestly, I'm not really interested in that stuff quite as much. Um, it seems like there's a lot of, techniques people will follow and things that people pursue. But to me, it seems like that would be an empty pursuit if you're building that for the sake of just building it.
Of course.
So that's actually one of the reasons why, I don't know, maybe like 5 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that, I shut off the ads on my channel because I didn't like the direction that it was putting me. It made me feel like I'm have to cater to what's popular to be rewarded by it, as opposed to doing what I think is going to be better for myself and more genuine and all that. So it's a challenge. It's a struggle. Though I'll say that I'm more of like the slow long-term approach of just putting stuff out there that I'm happy with and not really worrying about the instant gratification culture and everything else, and just being true to myself. And I think in the long term, that is the important thing. And so that's my view on that part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's probably the most immediate moral dilemma or conflict that I think a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people in our position have is, you know, making money out of our careers in the same way that you go to work and you get paid for doing it.
Yeah.
Unless you're producing a commodity of some description, there's a strange kind of fiscal relationship with it where people don't want to pay for it somehow.
Yeah. And I think for me, the main thing is like, I don't want this to become work. That's been my goal all along. And like, cause the moment it becomes work, you're not going to enjoy it to the same degree.
Right, we need to have a coaching session now. You can, we're going to flip it over. You're going to start chilling me out.
and it can be a bit of a challenge that way. But I mean, one of the things I've done is like, if there's something that I don't really want to do, something I don't really want to do, but I know it would be good to like grow everything. Usually I'm like, do I want to do it? No, I don't really want to do it. I'm not going to do it. So I've just been kind of like every intersection, I kind of go that route. And typically it's the sort of the path less traveled I end up taking. But when you do that, the destination is uncertain. You don't really know where you're heading with things. I think pretty much every single time it's going to be more satisfying and more rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if we just do the same as everybody else all the time, then
yeah,
it seems
you
hard.
reach a common destination. If you follow the crowd, you're going to reach a common destination. You'll get there and be like, well, this is cool, but I knew
It's
I
really
was
crowded here.
yeah, exactly. It's like a crowded viewpoint that everyone lines up the photograph. Like it's a certain thing, but is it a rewarding thing? Probably
Right.
not. So
Yeah.
I think that's why I've been a little bit of a contrarian in a way, in terms of just trying to make things where it's not work, and trying to make things where it's what I find to be enjoying, and just keep it so it's not work. And
Well,
that can be a challenge.
and I think well, what we tend to find is that that's the mentality that allows us to be successful in our chosen careers. I'm very much the same. Is that and Christine and I love what we do,
Mm-hmm.
and talking to you is certainly not work.
Yeah. Hey, that's why I
It,
said yes to this. To me, this is fun. This is not work. Yeah, I like it.
now, time to get a little bit more serious. You've talked about going back to Zion for 12 years or so.
Yeah,
Um, Zion is a very popular park.
it is.
And have you seen a change in the park and its use and the number of people going there, and how is that impacting on the park? Do you think the national parks are capable of managing the volume of people that are wanting to go into the parks these days?
Um, with Zion, it's really tricky because it has seen a huge explosion in visitation over the past few years. And I think that's something where Instagram and everything kind of has led to that. And it's a park that has it's not a big national park, but
No.
more important than that, the area that is designed to visit is this really small, narrow canyon.
Right.
And so you have a lot of people packing into a really small area. And there's a lot of other areas within the park that are off the beaten path, and you can explore. And I can go areas and not see any footprints, not see anyone there. You see wildlife and all kinds of things. Those are the areas I've been drawn to more lately. But yeah, there's been a huge impact. A lot of visitation. When I first started going there in the fall, which is certainly one of the most scenic times of year to visit, I could just drive up without any campsite reservations.
Right.
And now I book a campsite 6 months in advance.
Right.
There used to be that I could drive my vehicle into the main canyon, and then they went to a mandatory shuttle service. And then as you have these pinch points, then people start kind of flowing into other areas that are not designed for the people. And then with these crowds come a certain percentage of people that are going to do bad things. They're going to like write on walls. They're going to deface things. They're going to trample vegetation. And so what I've been seeing is that some of these areas that are off the beaten path, where I could be down in some wash and not see a single soul, I'm seeing a lot more people in those areas. And it's certainly not a bad thing that people are out exploring these areas, but when you have the crowds, you have the people that come along that will litter and do everything else. And that's the really sad stuff to see.
Right.
And so I don't know, there's some places like Zion where there isn't necessarily a great solution for it, but other areas like Death Valley, huge wide open expanses, like that's an area that can handle a lot of people for sure. But yeah, it has been a little troubling to see so many changes over such a really short period of time. And then also knowing that we're all kind of contributing to that as well.
Right.
So that gets to be a little bit of a tricky subject of, I'm there, I've been there for a long time. I've been exploring these areas, and I know that people have gone there because they've seen the videos and the pictures and stuff. So it does get a little tricky in that regard.
It does. It does. And well, when you're not alone in the fact that, I mean, we're the same here as, I haven't declared locations for quite a few years now because of the impact it has on the Scottish countryside. Everywhere off the path in Scotland is a bog, so it's very susceptible to getting trampled, and it gets muddy really quickly. And there's places now that are just the swamp. They're just an absolute swamp. And I've even had friends offering to pay or raise money to build boardwalks in some of these areas, but the landowners say no because of liability. They don't want the liability of someone injuring themselves on these boardwalks. Now, I watched a video of yours. Must have been last autumn or some. When was it? It was the poppies. It was the big. It was
that was in the springtime.
Was it this year or last year?
No, 2019.
Yeah, last year. And you were promoting the principles of the Nature First Alliance. And this is something you and I both share, is we're both kind of ambassadors, I think, of Nature First. And, I was having a chat with Sarah Marino and then Jennifer Renwick over the summer. And the number of people who've signed up is still really small, relatively, given the number of people who are out there with cameras. You'd think it would be something that would explode. What can we do to make this happen? Because it seems so obvious to me that it's the thing to do.
Yeah, and I think that's gonna be the challenging part of it, because it is something where on paper it makes perfect sense, and a lot of people see it, they're like, yeah, this makes sense, this is great stuff. But it is a challenge other than just constantly mentioning it, like this, for example, and then bringing it up in any way that we really can. But it's so sad to see that even in the time since they've been around, it seems like things just keep getting worse and worse and worse. Especially after here in the States, we had I think it's back in 2019, there was a government shutdown where basically a lot of the park
Yes.
rangers and stuff, they packed things up because they, weren't allowed to be out working. And yet people are just like driving over sensitive areas in Death Valley just because they could.
They could. Yeah.
And it's that small percentage of the people that I think are going to have the most obvious impact in terms of just like really poor behavior. And I don't think those people ever can be reached. If they were making all those decisions to do that, they're literally driving over signs that say, don't drive over here. So
Yeah.
I think there's a certain number of people that just, they're going to do what they're going to do. But certainly the impact that we all have as photographers, each of us has an impact. I think it's important to understand that. No matter, and maybe that's something where with Nature First, where sometimes maybe people look at it and say, oh, maybe that's just for the people that have, 500,000 followers on Instagram or whatever. Maybe they're the ones that need to listen to that. But in reality, it is everyone. I mean, everyone has an impact, and then that person has an impact and it spreads. But I don't know. I mean, I think it's unfortunately going to be an uphill battle for them just because things are moving in a bad direction, even as hard as we try and we advocate and we put it out there.
Well, I think what we're seeing at the moment is, and it's almost as if it's walking hand in hand with COVID. The more we're trying to control people's negative behaviors, whether it's not wearing masks or gathering in large groups or whatever it may be, it doesn't seem to matter what the governments are trying to do to try and restrict that. It's shocking here in the UK what's going on. But it's almost as if there seems some sort of sense of empowerment now that people have to say and do outrageous things. It's almost as if they have some kind of it's almost as if they've been given permission to be idiots. I try not to be judgmental, but this is a really difficult subject for me.
And I think it's one of the things where unfortunately that's the flip side of what the internet has brought, where it sort of enables people that otherwise would have been thinking, hey, I was thinking about driving out somewhere or doing this or doing that. But like, I don't see anyone else doing it. So, maybe I shouldn't. But then with, on the internet, people sharing all these sorts of things, and then all these like-minded people coming together. And unfortunately, it's the people that are doing the nefarious things coming together. It's there's a lot of good that can come from stuff like the social media, the internet and all that, but there's also, it happens on the flip side as well. So unfortunately, I think it's one of those things where there's not a great solution.
Well, for me, it's a horse that I want to saddle up to. It's the core foundation of our business. To promote responsible use of the countryside, because I don't know, it just seems ironic to me that landscape photographers, unless it's an ego-driven pursuit, we have to assume that they're there because they like nature. And sure. if vegetation is getting trampled and fins of sandstone are getting crushed and so forth, it just seems really an odd conflict between being a landscape photographer and being a trasher of the environment.
And that's something that I've been thinking about, like when I'm heading to Zion and at the end of this week for my fall trip out there, I have like different thoughts about this year. Normally it's a trip that I love going on because it's just an absolute slice of paradise. But I've been hearing some stories about people that are already there, and they're finding that there's litter in places that it hasn't been before, that there's rock stacks in areas that just ruins the wilderness experience. And so, I mean, when I'm heading there this year, I'm going to bring extra trash bags. I'm going to make a point of showing that, and doing what I can in that regard. But in some ways it kind of feels like just like putting a band-aid on like a gaping wound, where
Mm.
hopefully it's something that we can make a difference on. Another
Well,
thing,
sorry, carry on.
is that I find a lot on the trips is I find mylar balloons out in the wilderness, where
Right.
people just release these balloons. And that's been another thing where every single trip I go on, I end up like picking up all these mylar balloons. And it's almost comical how many of them are out there.
Wow.
And some of them were released intentionally. Maybe some of them kind of get away from people. But I've been, every single mylar balloon I find, I keep, and I have them in the closet back over my shoulder there. There's a box filled with Ziploc bags full of mylar balloons. And I'm
Wow.
going to make it into a project where I'm going to photograph them on 8x10 and make like a zine or something. And to me, there's kind of like some story behind that, in terms of, here you have this happy birthday balloon that was at someone's birthday party. Everyone's gathered together, happy moment. It gets released, and now it's like banished to the wilderness, just decaying slowly in Death Valley. And you come across this, shiny thing on the ground. It says happy birthday, but here it's getting baked in the sun. And
Right.
it's like each one has a story, but it's also flying trash.
Yeah.
So, I plan on doing a project with that, just to kind of raise awareness of that. And I have seen a lot of other photographers noticing them, I think, more now when they're out and about. And because I get all kinds of pictures of people like sending them with Instagram stories and stuff, holding up balloons that they found. So
Right.
there's some ways that we can raise awareness from people that might not realize the implications of what they're doing, and that these are just going to end up somewhere in the landscape and get eaten by animals and all that.
Right.
Yeah. So that's kind of what my approach has been, and we'll see how that works out.
Good. Well, it starts with awareness. I mean, me with my Zen Haggis stuff. It's about awareness and mindfulness, and landscape photography for me is mindfulness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about awareness, and it's about engagement and noticing and care and nurture, and all of these kind of attributes which seem to me like givens, but seem to be sadly lacking.
Mm-hmm.
There seems to be a new legitimacy to intimate photography.
Mm-hmm.
It seems, I know that there's people like Alex Noriega, who's very
Mm-hmm.
much swung in that direction. TJ Thorne, of
Mm-hmm.
course, is Mr. Intimate.
For sure.
William Neal, who's been around forever.
Yeah.
And obviously the last person I spoke to on Vision and Light prior to yourself was Charlie Kramer.
Yeah.
Now, something that really amused me with speaking to Charlie was one was that he managed to evade every question that I asked him, but secondly was he was talking about the limitations of film being a trigger for him shooting these types of intimate scenes, because they didn't have the sky in them, in terms of dust and stuff like that. How much of that was instrumental in your own movement into intimate scenes versus just a fascination with stuff that lies around on the ground?
So when I heard your conversation with Charlie on that, I was relating like 100% to that. So I shoot primarily on slide film,
Right.
and slide film has pretty high contrast, and if you shoot it in contrasty light, it's not a good choice. But you shoot it in that subdued light, and it's just so beautiful.
Yeah.
So part of it's because the film is so well suited for that kind of light, the nice soft, subtle reflected light, but also the experience of working with a view camera. If you're shooting something like a grand landscape where you have, clouds moving in the sky, light changing quickly, it can be very frustrating.
Right.
And so it's not typically, it's an experience that I'll shoot stuff like that, but it's not an enjoyable experience necessarily. But the experience of shooting stuff on the ground, that's the very Zen-like moment where the light's not changing. The subject really isn't changing. You have the time to work with it and fine tune your composition. That is one of the most enjoyable parts of photography for me.
Right.
Just taking the time, and especially with large format where you have the dark cloth that you're kind of underneath and looking at the ground glass, everything else quiets down. You don't see anything else. You're just concentrating on that one composition. For me, that is one of the most enjoyable parts of it, because I think what comes through in the photo, because it's a very calm subject, is also replicated by the experience of taking that photo.
Okay.
which I think builds more satisfaction with the work when it's done. Or get the film back, I look at it, I'm like, yep, get the same feeling looking at this as I had when I shot it. And so for me, it definitely is the limitations of the equipment in the film that lends itself to the intimate landscapes, because it's far more enjoyable to shoot.
Right.
And the other thing too, I shoot a lot of those with a normal lens.
Hmm.
From this, and that just means that if you're just like looking around for subjects, if something looks good to your eye, you can frame it up with a normal lens pretty well.
Right.
So that really helps in the scouting process, as opposed to trying to foresee how something will look with a wide angle lens, which is a little harder to do until
Yeah.
you actually have
Yeah.
it on there.
Well, that's right. And it's a real perspective messer. You know,
Yeah.
it changes those relationships. How important are movements to you in these photographs? You know, because obviously some of them are, you know, it looks like you're having to tilt the
Mhm.
plane somewhat to.
Yeah. So that stuff is just a necessity with large format. The depth of field is tiny. It's like hair thin. So yeah, you have to like configure the lens and everything and all that just in order to try to get everything sharp that should be sharp.
Right.
But one of the things that's actually been kind of nice about large format is that it's very imperfect by nature.
Right.
So there are certain things that are just not possible.
Okay.
And so when you take a photo and you realize that there are, let's say that there's three important elements in that photo. If you can get those three important elements in focus at the expense of maybe some other elements that are not going to be quite in focus because you couldn't quite get them, to me, I'm satisfied with that.
Okay.
I'm not worrying about like, oh, if only I could have gotten everything, if only it could have been sharper. So it's kind of imperfect by nature,
Okay.
which I think it's easier to be satisfied with it in that sense, because it's kind of like, it is what it is. It turned out good. I'm happy with it. Yeah.
It strikes me that there's I think the general impression with large format and even 4:5
Hmm.
as well, you know, is that it's a technical exercise. You know,
Hmm.
there's an awful lot to do. You know, you're dealing with cloths and ground glass and
Hmm.
everything's upside down, and you know,
Yeah.
and you know, you're having to get your tilt and your shift and all of this stuff going off.
Yeah.
Um, that there's it seems like there's a lot to remember, you know, whereas with
There
digital
is.
photography it's a very, you know, expose and focus, and the camera is doing a lot of that for you.
Hmm.
You know, so you can kind of rely on your innate sense of the aesthetic to kind of take over for the kind of the art bit, as it
Hmm.
were. Have you got to the stage with your large format photography that you're kind of working on autopilot
Oh, for
for the
sure.
technicals?
Yeah.
Now, does I'm really curious as to how zen-like your interaction with the moment is, you know, because you know, like you said, you're pulling the cloth over your head and it's you're looking at the ground glass and it must
Yeah.
be super engaging.
It is. And actually, one of the little secrets about large format, it's not that difficult to do. It's actually pretty simple from the standpoint that the cameras are simple,
Right.
and it's doing like with which film you choose, it's doing most of the work. So there's not a lot of post processing time spent on it. Um, but you have to be very OCD about the process in terms of doing things in a very particular order, and you build that pretty fast, usually by wasting a lot of money on film, but you, you build that process pretty fast. And since it is so methodical, you know, this step, this step, this step, um, I think that kind of builds into the sort of the zen process of it,
Mhm.
because it's very literally process oriented when you're shooting the stuff. And just like you were saying, like I don't really think about it anymore about what I'm doing, and you just, your hands reach for dials and you just kind of do everything you need to do. But there are certain moments when you're really do have to pay attention, like, you know, metering the scene and all that
Right.
kind of stuff. You don't really want to be on autopilot for that.
No.
But I think because there's a lot of physical stuff that you're doing, a lot of things going on. I think that does actually add to the calm sense of it, the very zen sense of it, except for those grand landscapes. When light's changing fast, you have to remeter and change an aperture and this and that. And that's when I just yeah, that's not fun.
I agree. I find that grand landscapes, it's almost as if they're imperfect by nature.
Hmm.
So part of their essence is their imperfection almost. The landscape rarely lines up perfectly. There's always
Yeah,
something that's a problem.
yeah,
Whereas intimate scenes, there just seems to be, it's the noticing the perfection, like you say, at your feet. I mean, I could just look through your intimate gallery all day. I mean, it's just each one of them just strikes me as they're perfect in in their, well, it's like you're saying that large format is imperfect by nature.
hmm,
It's almost as if your compositions is the flip side of that, is that there's perfection in imperfection almost.
yeah. And I think it's I'm trying to think of how to phrase it. Um, yeah, I really don't know how to phrase it other than just when you work with large format. There's a certain almost like um, recipe to the process where, especially with the intimate landscapes, where you just have time to just dial in everything, to consider every little aspect of it, because you see that image on the ground glass, and I'll actually sometimes like use my fingers and like measure the difference between like a leaf and the edge of the frame, then kind of over there and measure it. And there's almost no cropping after the fact, because it's
Right.
just, I see the final photo, I'm like, I'm pretty happy with it. So yeah, I don't really know how to describe it other than it's just it, I think um, the enjoyment of the process oftentimes comes through in the photo, and that's one of the ways I evaluate the photo as being successful. Because it's certainly frustrating. This doesn't matter what you're shooting, but it's frustrating when it's not what you thought it would be, which happens as well. But with intimate landscapes, I usually have a pretty good um, average on those turning out a bit like what I was expecting it to be.
In terms of this type of photography, because I think a lot of people struggle with it.
Hmm.
I think, you know, if you're familiar with my channel and my work,
Hmm.
it's very much, uh, I'm challenging the status quo of of the way landscape photography is taught.
Hmm.
Rules,
Yeah,
formulas, somehow templating
yeah.
nature, which just repels me
Yeah.
completely. So
But
I'm
it
always,
makes really good videos if it's like, top 5 secrets you need to know for landscape, very compelling for that. But
yeah,
practice not so
I
much.
don't think that's going to be my direction.
Exactly.
But I'm very curious about the process of you discovering your photos, or the things that you choose to point your camera at.
Hmm.
Do you think is there an element of seeking, or do you just see? Do you just notice stuff,
I think you
or
have
do
to
you
actively
look for
seek.
stuff?
I think you have to actively force yourself to look, because it's really easy to just walk through an area and think you're looking at things, but you're really not. And I did a video a little while back where I showed 4 different photos and kind of was asking people to figure out what they had in common. And as it turns out, those 4 photos were taken within 50 feet of each other in one little corner of a wash in Zion over the course of several years.
Right.
And many of those subjects are ones that I walked past several times before even noticing them.
Mm.
Even when I'm thinking them out there looking for subjects, at a certain point, your mind kind of drifts off a little bit and everything starts looking the same: rocks, leaves, bushes. But I've since learned that, and I haven't quite figured out what I called maybe like active vision, active seeing, something where you have to actually force yourself to like sit there and like look at literally everything around you, as opposed to like reading like a book by kind of skimming through it, which I think is what we do when we're just walking through a scene. But
Right.
like looking at every single word, looking at the words backwards, like you're proofreading something.
Okay.
And I think that that's when I start to notice the things a little bit more. And ultimately, it's sometimes my own curiosity that kind of like points me in a certain direction. There was I think it was back in like 2015. I was in Zion. I'm walking along this area where there are these big ponderosa pine trees, huge, huge trees. And I was just like kind of looking at the trees, and I like to go smell the trees. They smell like vanilla. They smell really, really good. So I'm up there like sniffing this tree. I didn't want to hug it because it gets sap all over me, but it kind of backed away from me. I see this pine needle that's kind of stuck in the bark.
Right.
And this pine needle, I'm like, that's kind of interesting. It happened to land there, you know. But it's like this three needles on this pine needle, and it forms an arrow. I'm like, I don't know what that's pointing at. I look down at the base of the tree, and I see like this really cool like maple growing really low among the like the pine needles, like these dead pine needles on the ground, this colorful maple. I'm like, well, that's what it's pointing at. And that was something I took a photo of. So it's like following your curiosity, whether it's something simple like that or just forcing yourself to look around in a way that even if you think you're looking at subjects, you really do need to force yourself to look at it. Because I always tell people that, you know, if you're out and you have something in your mind that you want to photograph, you're going to ignore everything else along the way. And you probably just walked past like 10 great scenes.
Totally.
Yeah. So that's why I try to force myself to see that.
How important is confidence to you? Do you think confidence is a key component? Because a lot of the stuff, I mean, a lot of people are going to look at some of these photographs and say, that's just a pile of leaves. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
It's like, that's not a photograph, it's just a pile of leaves, you know. There's that literal what it is, but at the same time, you know, are you the type of person that builds a lot of metaphor into your own images? I mean, is your experience wrapped up in metaphor? Is there stuff that you're thinking about when you're in the field shooting, or when you're looking at your images again when you get them back? Or are you a guy that's like, well, it's a pile of leaves, but it's a really cool pile of leaves?
well, first of all, that's kind of the joke that I have between me and my wife. That I'll go on these trips for, you know, a week or two at a time. I just take pictures of like rocks and twigs and leaves and stuff. But I think on some of those smaller scenes, I wouldn't say, sometimes there's a little something I'm kind of thinking about. Usually I think I'll know if there's something deeper I'm thinking about if I can think of the title of the photo as I'm shooting the photo, because there's something that photo shows. There's a photo I shot back in 2015 in Zion where it's this damp sand in a wash with this red maple leaf in there, and you have this really strong reflected light. And I call that eternal optimist, because like the leaf is kind of like reaching upward, and it's like this really bright, warm light. And if I remember right, I think I sort of thought of the name of that as I was photographing it. So I think if I can think of a name for that photo, it kind of shows a thought process that I am actively thinking of that. But there's another flip side of that, which is I try not to, if I'm thinking of a cool name for a photo, sometimes I feel like that curses the scene a little bit, because I'm like, oh, this has a name, this is going to be good. And I see it's going to be horrible. There was a photo back in 2018 I shot. It was in Zion during the fall as this thunderstorm was rolling through. You know, thunder cracking overhead, fresh rain falling. There's this beautiful red maple. And I was taking a picture of it. I'm like, oh, I'm going to call this one Thunder Maple. This is going to be awesome. Looked at it, worst photo I shot. So I always think of like, if I'm setting up a photo and I'm thinking of a name for it, I'm like, remember the Thunder Maple. This, I don't want to name it too much because this could go in a bad direction. But I think when I'm attracted to a scene, it's mostly because of at least the small scenes, just the visual nature of it. But then after getting it, then you kind of start, especially when you view the slides on a light box and kind of get to know the photo a little bit better after you shot it. I definitely do whatever it is I'm feeling at the time when I was setting up that photo. I think kind of is portrayed in that photo itself, because I chose it for a reason. It was it appealed to me at that particular time, at that particular day.
And you think that's going to be easier with a lower degree of productivity? Because I mean, I guess when you're shooting 10x8, you know, you're, as you said, when you go out for 7-10 days, there's a limit to how much film you can carry, as opposed to a 256 gigabyte SD card, you know, which you can stick 3,000 files on. You know, so do you think that allows for a greater sense of connection, memorability? You know, that sort of.
It does. I think it does, because like when I go on the trips, my goal is to photograph one scene a day.
Right.
If I can find more than that, it's great. But I think when you shoot less, I think you're going to remember that moment even more. And then I think that really helps afterwards. Um, and there's another thing I've been kind of thinking about, which is about how the art world doesn't really look kindly upon landscape photography or color landscape photography. And I've been thinking about doing like a video on this topic. I've been trying to formulate my thoughts, but it kind of goes into that a little bit, where if you can evoke emotion with a photo, especially a landscape photo that that mostly resembles reality. I try to keep the photos pretty close to reality. I don't do much heavy processing on them. But if you can evoke emotion, well, if I can express emotion through a photograph, and I can evoke the emotion with the photograph when someone else views it, they kind of get the same sort of feeling, but it's taken with a very limited toolbox in terms
Mhm.
of, not using any sort of, like, whether it's like in-camera movements or stuff like that, or excessive processing to make it where it's something much different than it really was. To me, that kind of strikes more at what art really should be, where in terms of evoking emotion with a very limited tool set, as
Mm.
opposed to relying heavily on more on technique and processing and stuff. So in some ways, it's almost like you have a very contemporary painting where it's just like a big square with a circle in it.
Mhm.
Very, very minimal. Is that going to evoke emotion? Some people it may. Some people might say it's a circle, But if you can have a photo that depicts reality that evokes emotion with a very limited tool set, to me, I think that kind of strikes at something a little bit deeper. So I don't know. Maybe I'm a little resentment towards the art world, but
I think most landscape photographers do.
yeah.
Yeah, we're not particularly we're kind of frowned upon a little bit.
Yeah, the
Um,
perception is, oh, you just took a picture of a pretty picture or whatever. It's like, well, you're maybe not reading into it as much as you should. I don't know.
a rat, isn't it? Isn't it
Yeah,
another rock, another tree? Isn't that
exactly.
the little acronym?
Yeah.
Well, I agree. I mean, I'm in the middle of writing a book, or near the end of writing a book called The Color of Meaning.
Hmm.
And I'm looking at some of your photographs, and there's color combinations, there's color contrasts.
Hmm.
There's the way that colors can evoke emotions.
Hmm.
But one final question. I'm getting to the point where I'm realizing we're well over. Well, we're over an hour now, so we can start steering it towards a close, I suppose. But you've talked about when you go into the landscape, and that if little things bug you, then it takes you out of that zone
Yeah.
pretty quick. How significant on your work is that state of mind that you're in versus, can the landscape turn you around? Is there a, I kind of look on it as a seesaw, yeah, with a
Hmm.
fulcrum in the middle, whereas on one side of on the seesaw you have your state of mind and who you are walking into the landscape, and that can be grumpy or optimistic or
Yeah.
passionate or melancholy or troubled.
Hmm.
We've got all of these different states of mind that we can inhabit, and then you've got the landscape, which just is, but at the same time, leaves on sandstone have a very different emotional color palette than ice in a frozen pond.
Hmm.
They're very different
Yeah.
emotionally and aesthetically. Do you think you're drawn to certain things in one state of mind and other things in another state of mind? Or do you respond to the landscape, or are you going into the landscape thinking, right, well, I'm feeling kind of melancholy. Oh, that frozen pond is really resonating with me right now.
Um,
I'm curious about your perspective on that kind of relationship.
I think as soon as I see something that captures my attention for one reason or another, I kind of forget about that shoe that's bugging me, I just, like, it doesn't take much, like something bright and shiny. I'm like, oh, there you go. And sometimes it's a Mylar balloon, but I'll see something that whether it's the frozen pool with water with a leaf in there, and I'll see that, and then all of a sudden my mind snaps right to, oh, this is good. forget about what's going on. I just kind of go into that sort of that zone, which I think is one of the things I really love about photography, because you just, especially with large format, when you find a subject that's good, the entire thought process is just photography, photography, photography. Everything else is kind of quiets down.
Right.
I think it's really more so in the moments when I'm not shooting, when I'm not working on anything, where I feel like, maybe I should have found something better today or something along those lines. I think that's when that kind of creeps in a little bit more. But I don't think, how it is I'm feeling necessarily is going to dictate what I'm going to select as far as a subject. But I do think that as I'm shooting it, it definitely calms the mind and kind of gives a degree of focus. And the other thing too is, after a trip goes on and on and on, since I have no clue how the photos turned out. Early on in the trip, I'm really hungry to get that first photo.
Right.
So I'm really just like itching to get that first photo. And then as I start shooting more and more photos, at a certain point, I start getting curious about how they turned out. And like, it's that, one side is kind of like, a hunger to shoot the photo. The other one is satisfaction with the work I've done. At some point it starts to outweigh it, where it's kind of like, I know I've got some decent stuff in there.
Right.
I do play mind games with myself. I just tell myself all the photos I've shot so far, horrendous, light leaks, horrible, forces me to keep going. But at a certain point, I know like I couldn't have messed up that much. So there should be, there's got to be something in there. Yeah.
One final question, and I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I could honestly just carry on. I mean, we could
It's been
just,
fun.
yeah, I could just totally carry on. I'm really enjoying this. Do you think that the career as a professional photographer is going to live up to everything that you thought it was going to be?
I think in reality, I've already been kind of doing that for a while, so I don't think there's going to be any real surprises. Other than the fact that now I'll have the ability to plan some more like last minute sort of trips to coincide with certain weather things I just wouldn't have been possible before. So I think it'll give more opportunities, but in reality, I think I've already been kind of living the lifestyle for a while. So I don't predict there being too many surprises. I'm very much a homebody. I love being at home. So like going on a trip, putting in, a week or so of work, then coming home and just relaxing, going through everything. I think some people, if they picture like a professional landscape photographer, they picture someone that's, out all the time taking photos. That's not me. I'm perfectly happy at home doing accounting stuff. I mean, I've got no problem with that. So I think I'm well versed with that side of it, but I'm definitely looking forward to planning some trips to coincide with weather, and probably trips I'm not going to do video on, just so I can enjoy the moment and just get that dose of just getting out there without making it become work. So I think that's my goal, to keep it where it's not work. And I think hopefully,
it's a balance, and it's a balance we all have to try and strike. I mean, I don't get out as often as I'd like, and it's it's about balance. But listen, Ben, it's been, for saying this is the first time we've ever had a conversation, it's just been such a joy. I've been really looking forward to this, and it's lived up to, I don't tend to have expectations, but of all the expectations I didn't have, this has exceeded them.
I appreciate that. I've enjoyed this as well. It's been a very fun chat.
Cool. Well, I look forward to sharing it with the world, and I hope that one day we can meet in person when we get over to the States. And
for sure.
Yeah, it would be awesome to hang out.
Yeah, I'm on board with that for sure, for 100% for sure. Yeah.
Cool.